Indira Gandhi's unwavering leadership and India's emergency era. This video will provide an insight into one of the most controversial and we can say dark phases in India's post-independence history, that is national emergency in India. In the 1970s, India under the leadership of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi faced a critical juncture in its history. A period known as emergency would test the nation's resilience and its commitment to democracy. Indira Gandhi, daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India, took office in 1966. She faced a host of challenges including economic instability, political unrest, and regional tensions. By the 1975, India was grappling with rising inflation, corruption, and a fragmented political landscape. Indira Gandhi's government declared a state of emergency on June 25, 1975, citing internal disturbances as the reason, which continued for 21 months from 1975 to 77. The emergency in India was a period of extraordinary political and constitutional crisis. It was declared under Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, citing internal disturbance as the reason. In the early 70s, India experienced significant political turmoil with multiple states facing instability. There were protests, strikes, and agitations leading to a sense of lawlessness and disorder. A crucial trigger was the 𝗂𝗲𝗲𝗃 High Court's ruling in June 1975, which declared Indira Gandhi's election to Parliament invalid due to electoral malpractices. The court ordered her to vacate her parliamentary seat. Indira Gandhi's decision to declare the emergency was also influenced by her desire to hold on to power and prevent potential prosecution. She perceived the judiciary and the political opposition as threats to her leadership. There were rising tensions between central government and the state governments, particularly those led by non-Congress parties. Some states like Gujarat and Bihar were in the midst of political crisis. India faced economic challenges including inflation and food scarcity. The government's efforts to address these issues were seen as inadequate, leading to public dissatisfaction. There were concerns about the security of the nation, including internal security issues, communal violence, and insurgencies in certain regions. During the emergency, there was extensive censorship of the media, which stifled freedom of expression and dissemination of information. This furthered the perception of authoritarian rule. The emergency saw the suspension of many civil liberties, including right to protest, free speech, and freedom of the press. Political opponents and activists were arrested. The emergency marked a significant departure from democratic norms. Many viewed it as an authoritarian move to consolidate power. Indira Gandhi's government aimed to stabilize the nation, but the methods used raised concerns about human rights and the freedom of expression. One of the most controversial aspects of the emergency was the forced sterilization campaign. The government's population control program aimed to curb India's burgeoning population, but its implementation was met with resistance and allegations of abuse. Protests against the sterilization program and the suspension of civil liberties gained momentum. Opposition parties, activists, and students came together to demand a return to democracy. Notable figures like Jayaprakash Narayan emerged as leaders of opposition movement. His call for total revolution echoed the sentiments of those who sought to challenge the government's authoritarian rule. The turning point came in 1977 when Indira Gandhi called for elections and lifted the state of emergency. The opposition formed a coalition known as Janata Party, which won a decisive victory, ending the emergency rule. The Janata Party assumed power, marking the first peaceful transition of power in independent India. Indira Gandhi faced defeat but remained a formidable political figure, eventually returning to office in 1980. Tragically, Indira Gandhi's life was cut short when she was assassinated by her own Sikh bodyguards in 1984. What most people believe was the repercussion of the Operation Blue Star on the Golden Temple Amritsar, which severely hurt the Sikh sentiments. Her death sent shockwaves through the nation and led to widespread violence against the Sikh community. Emergency had profound and lasting impacts on the country across various dimensions, including politics, society, and the governance. Civil liberties and fundamental rights, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and assembly were severely curtailed. The government's actions led to a climate of fear and censorship. Opposition leaders, activists, and journalists critical of the government were arrested and detained without trial. This crackdown on political dissent weakened India's democratic foundation. The emergency saw a significant centralization of power in the hands of Prime Minister and her government. The state's autonomy was reduced and the federal structure of the Indian democracy was undermined. Economic policies during the emergency aimed at controlling inflation and stabilizing the economy, but they were often criticized for being authoritarian and top-down. These policies had mixed results and contributed to economic inequality. The media was heavily censored and the journalists faced restrictions on reporting. This led to self-censorship and a decline in freedom of press. The experience of emergency prompted electoral reforms, including stricter campaign finance laws and rules to prevent electoral malpractices. The widespread unpopularity of the emergency led to the emergence of a strong opposition coalition, the Janata Party, which won the 1977 elections. This marked a shift in India's political landscape. The end of emergency in 1977 marked the restoration of democracy in India. Free and fair elections were held and power transitioned peacefully. The emergency left a lasting legacy of caution and vigilance among Indian citizens and institutions regarding the potential for authoritarianism. It reinforced the importance of upholding democratic values. The judiciary's role during the emergency, particularly the Allahabad High Court's decision, reaffirmed the importance of an independent judiciary in checking the abuse of executive power. The repercussions of emergency in India were significant and far-reaching, affecting various aspects of Indian society, politics and governance. The emergency eroded the public's trust in government, particularly in the ruling Indian National Congress Party. The authoritarian actions of the government during this period left a lasting sense of skepticism about political leaders and their intentions. The widespread unpopularity of the emergency led to the formation of a strong opposition coalition and marked a shift in Indian politics away from single-party dominance. The government during the emergency made several amendments to the Indian Constitution, including 42nd Amendment, which expanded the powers of executive and limited fundamental rights. Many of these amendments were reversed later by Janata government. The suppression of media during the emergency highlighted the importance of a free press in a democracy. After the emergency, there was a renewed commitment to media freedom and independence. The experience of the emergency prompted electoral reforms to prevent electoral malpractices and ensure fair elections. These reforms aimed at strengthening the transparency and integrity of the electoral process. The abuses of power during the emergency underscored the importance of checks and balances within the Indian political system. There was a renewed emphasis on the role of institutions like judiciary and the election commission in safeguarding democracy. The period of emergency saw increased citizen activism against the government's authoritarian actions. The judiciary's role during the emergency, including the famous 𝗂𝗵𝗿𝗄𝗃 case, solidified its position as a guardian of the constitution. This period highlighted the judiciary's role in protecting individual freedoms. Emergency had a lasting impact on India's political culture with a deep-seated aversion to authoritarianism. Subsequent governments have been cautious about taking measures that could be perceived as undermining democratic principles.